Welcome back to Lutuf's Literary Club. In my last video, I discussed the 18th century and the related terminology that is attached to the age. In this short video, I'll discuss the age of Pope that started in 1700 and ended in 1744. The earlier part of the 18th century, or the Augustan age, in English literature is called the Age of Pope because Pope was the dominating figure in that period. Though there were a number of other important writers like Addison and Swift, but Pope was the only one who devoted himself completely to literature. Moreover, he represented in himself all the main characteristics of his age, and his poetry served as a model to others. It was the classical school of poetry which dominated the poetry of the age of Pope. During this age, the people were disgusted with the profligacy and frivolity of the Restoration period, and they insisted upon those elementary decencies of life and conduct which were looked at with contempt by the preceding generation. Moreover, they had no sympathy for the fanaticism and religious zeal of the Puritans, who were out to ban even the most innocent means of recreation. So they wanted to follow the middle path in everything and steer clear of the emotion as well as moral excesses. They insisted on the role of intelligence in everything. The poets of this period are deficient on the side of emotion and imagination. Dominated by intellect, poetry of this age is commonly didactic and satirical, a poetry of argument and criticism of politics and personalities. In the second place, the poets of this age are more interested in the town and the cultural society. They have no sympathy for the humbler aspects of life, that is, the life of the villagers, the shepherds, and no love for nature, the beautiful flowers, the songs of birds, and landscape as we find in the poets of the Romantic period. Though they preached a virtuous life, they would not display any feeling which smacked of enthusiasm and earnestness. Naturally, they had no regard for the great poets of the human heart like Chaucer and Shakespeare. They had no attachment for the Middle Ages and their tales of chivalry, adventure, and visionary idealism. Spenser therefore did not find favor with them. In the poetry of this age, form became more important than substance. This love of superficial polish led to the establishment of a highly artificial and conventional style. The closed couplet became the only possible form of serious work in verse. Naturally, poetry became monotonous because the couplet was too narrow and inflexible to be made the vehicle of high passion and strong imagination. Moreover, as great emphasis was laid on the imitation of ancient writers, originality was discouraged and poetry lost touch with the real life of the pupil. Prose being the prominent medium of expression, the rules of exactness, precision, and clarity which were insisted in the writing of prose also began to be applied to poetry. It was demanded of the poet to say all that he had to say in a plain, simple, and clear language. The result was that the quality of suggestiveness, which adds so much to the beauty and worth of poetry, was sadly lacking in the poetry of this age. The meaning of poetry was all on the surface, and there was nothing which required deep study and varied interpretations. Alexander Pope is considered as the greatest poet of the classical period. He is Prince of Classicism, as Professor Eaton calls him. He was an invalid of small stature and delicate constitution, whose bad nerves and cruel headaches made his life, in his own phrase, a long disease. Moreover, being a Catholic, he had to labor under various restrictions. But the wonder is that, in spite of his manifold handicaps, this small, ugly man has left a permanent mark on the literature of his age. He was highly intellectual, extremely ambitious, and capable of tremendous industry. These qualities brought him to the front rank of men of letters, and during his lifetime he was looked upon as a model poet. The main quality of Pope's poetry is its correctness. It was at the age of 23 that he published his essay on criticism, and since then till the end of his life he enjoyed prodigious reputation. In this essay, Pope insists on following the rules discovered by the ancients because they are in harmony with nature. Pope's next work, The Rape of the Lock, is in some ways his masterpiece. It is a mock heroic poem in which he celebrated the theme of the stealth by Lord Peter of lock of hair from the head of Miss Arabella. Though the poem is written in a jest and deals with a very insignificant event, it is given the form of an epic investing these frivolous events with mock seriousness and dignity. By this time Pope had perfected the heroic couplet, and he made use of his technical skill in translating Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which meant hard work of 11 years. The reputation that Pope now enjoyed created a host of jealous rivals whom he severely criticized and ridiculed in the Dunciad. This is Pope's greatest satire, in which he attacked all sorts of literary incompetence. It is full of cruel and insulting couplets on his enemies. His next great poem was the Essay on Man, which is full of brilliant, oft-quoted passages and lines. His later works, imitations of Horace and Epistle, are also satires and contain biting attacks on his enemies. Though Pope enjoyed a tremendous reputation during his lifetime and for some decades after his death, he was so bitterly attacked during the 19th century that it was doubted whether Pope was a poet at all. But in the 20th century this reaction subsided, and now it is admitted by great critics that though much that Pope wrote is prosaic, not of a very high order, yet a part of his poetry is undoubtedly indestructible. He is the supreme master of the epigrammatic style of condensing an idea into a line or couplet. Of course, the thoughts in his poetry are commonplace, but they are given the most appropriate and perfect expression. The result is that many of them have become proverbial sayings in the English language. During his age, Pope was by far the greatest of all poets. There were a few minor poets which need to be mentioned here. Matthew Prior was a diplomat and active politician who wrote two long poems, Solomon on the Vanity of the Word and Alma or the Progress of the Mind. These are serious poems, but the reputation of Prior rests on light verse dealing with trifling matters. He is not merely a light-hearted jester but a true humanist with sense of tears as well as laughter, as is seen in the lines written in the beginning of Mazar's History of France. Another important poet of the age was John Gay, who is the master of vivid description of rural scenes as well of the delights of the town. Like Prior, he is full of humor and good temper as a writer of lyrics, and in the handling of the couplet he shows considerable technical skill. His best known works are Rural Supports, Trivia, or The Art of Walking the Streets of London, Black-Eyed Susan, and some fables. Prior and Gay were the followers of Pope, and after Pope, they are the two excellent guides to the life of 18th century London. Edward Young is another poet. In his universal patience showed himself as skillful a satirist as Pope. His best known work is the Night Thoughts, which written in blank verse shows considerable technical skill and deep thought. Thomas Parnell excelled in translations. His best known works are the Night Piece on Death and Hymn to Contentment, which have a freshness of outlook and metrical skills. So these were the poets of the age of Pope. Now we shall look at the prose of the age of Pope. The great prose writers of the age of Pope were Defoe, Addison, Steele, and Swift. The prose of this period exhibits the classical qualities, clearness, vigor, and direct statement. Daniel Defoe, who was born in 1661 and died in 1731, is the earliest literary journalist in the English language. He wrote on all sorts of subjects, whether they were social, political, literary, and brought out about 250 publications. He owes his importance in literature, however, mainly to his works of fiction, which were simply the offshoots of his general journalistic enterprises. As a journalist, he was fond of writing about the lives of famous people who had just died and of notorious adventurers and criminals. At the age of 60, he turned his attention to the writing of prose fiction and published his first novel, Robinson Crusoe. That is the book by which he is universally known. It was followed by other works of fiction, the memoirs of Cavalier, Captain Singleton, Moll Flanders, Colonel Jake, Roxana, and Journal of the Plague Year. In these works of fiction, Defoe gave his stories an air of reality and convinced his readers of their authenticity. Another important prose writer of the age was Jonathan Swift, who was born in 1667 and died in 1745. He was the most powerful and original genius of his age. He was highly intellectual, but on account of some radical disorder in his system and the repeated failures which he had to face in the realization of his ambition to rise in public life, made him a bitter, melancholy, and sardonic figure. He took delight in flouting conventions and undermining the reputations of his opponents. His best known work, Gulliver's Travels, which is a very popular children's book, is also a bitter attack on contemporary political and social life in particular, and on the meanness and littleness of man in general. The Tale of a Tub, which, like Gulliver's Travels, is written in the form of an allegory and exposes the weaknesses of the main religious beliefs opposed to Protestant religion, is also a satire upon all science and philosophy. His journal to Stella, which was written to Esther Johnson, whom Swift loved, is not only an excellent commentary on contemporary characters and political events, but in love passages and purely personal descriptions, it reveals the real tenderness which lay concealed in the depths of his fierce and domineering nature. The finest example of irony is to be found in his pamphlet The Battle of Books, in which he championed the cause of the ancients against the modern. The mock heroic description of the great battle in the king's library between the rival hosts is a masterpiece of its kind. The true masters of periodical essays in this age were Joseph Addison and Sir Richard Steele. who worked in collaborations, were the originators of the periodical essay. Steele, who was more original, led the way by founding the Tatler, the first of the long line of 18th century periodical essays. This was followed by the most famous of them, The Spectator, in which Edison, who had formerly contributed to Steele's Tatler, now became the chief partner. The purpose of the writings of Steele and Edison was ethical. They tried to reform society through the medium of the periodical essay. They set themselves as moralistic to break down two opposed influences, that of the profligate restoration tradition of loose living and loose thinking on the one hand, and that of Puritan fanaticism and bigotry on the other. Both Steele and Edison were great masters of prose. Their essays are remarkable as showing the growing perfection of the English language. Of the two, Edison was a greater master of the language. He cultivated a highly cultured and graceful style, a style which can serve as a model. Dr. Johnson very aptly remarked, "Whoever wishes to attain an English style, familiar but not coarse, and elegant but not ostentatious, must give his days and nights to the volumes of Edison." And again he said, "Give nights and days to the study of Edison if you mean to be a good writer, or what is more worth, an honest man." So this was all about the age of Pope. In my next video we shall discuss the age of Johnson. Till that, stay connected to Lutuf's Literary Club. Happy learning.